And the most important thing, you have to charge somebody to the game if they are trying to throw salt on your upgrade. Whenever you're trying to upgrade yourself and you have somebody trying to tear you down, they have something slick to say about you upgrading yourself, that's when you have to let them go. Because a lot of times when we get into relationships, we're supposed to grow together. Sometimes we grow apart. If our significant others, they're not growing with us, then we might have to charge them to the game because they're going to get resentful. Not just significant others, but friends and peers. You ever notice when you go to school or you get something going on, your friends try to talk you out of certain things. They might try to talk you down out of certain things. They're like, why are you doing that? Why are you going to school? Well, you're trying to be white. Trying to be like the white folks. I'm keeping it 100 in these streets. And that's another thing. Let me tell y'all something about the streets, man. The street game ain't popping right now. If you have any seed of criminal mindedness, get that out your head. The street game is not popping no more. It's not popping. Don't let these dudes in the street tell you it's popping. Don't let these records tell you it's popping. The street game ain't popping. People always tell you about the good side. They don't tell you about the reality and the downside. Like a lot of records and a lot of our rappers out here, they'll sit up and talk about all the dope they sold, but in real life, they're police officers. And I love Rick Ross. I know y'all think of Rick Ross. But look at Rick Ross's song, and I love that song, the BMF song. Like, I think I'm Big Meech. Who else? Whipping work. Well, Big Meech is in jail for 30 years, the real Big Meech. Right? The real Larry Hoover has been in jail since 1973. And he's not getting out. He has 200 years. Rap about that. That's the reality of the game. You understand that? When your favorite rapper's talking about how big of a Crip and Blood they are, they can't go to LA. They go to LA to get robbed. So for real. A lot of these rappers talking about how big of a pimp they are, then you have groupies coming out with tell-all books talking about how much they done tricked. So the thing is, people try to glamorize the street game, and the street game is just not popping the way it used to pop. And I'm not saying this from a moral standpoint, just from a practical standpoint, because 50 years ago, the street game was popping. The street game was off the hook because people got into the street game out of necessity. A lot of black folks were going through segregation, so they had to do what they had to do to survive. And back in the day, there was three main hustles. There was the pimp game, the policy game, and the dope game. Now, for those who don't know, the policy game, a lot of people don't know about that. That was an illegal lottery that was going on in many black communities, and a lot of brothers made millions of dollars doing that. There was a movie that touched on that called Hoodlum with Larry Fishburne. You guys see that? Yeah. Very good movie if you haven't seen it. That gives you an idea of the policy game. What killed that on a street level was the legal lottery. They just legalized it, and it killed it on a street level. So those hustlers had to get into something else. Now, the pimp game was popping years ago because it was just the track and the pimps. That was it. You had to have a certain kind of mentality to be a pimp. You had to dress a certain way. You had to have a certain mouthpiece. You had to understand the rules of the game. There were rules to the pimp game back then. Every dude couldn't do it. Now you have the internet where girls can just post up and make $30, $40, and then they end up choosing on what we call slash pimps. You know what a slash pimp is? A crack dealer slash pimp, carjacker slash pimp, bank robber slash pimp. So they're not really pimps. These dudes are just pimping as a hobby. Back then it was like pimp or die. That's what you did. You can't get money from nothing else but pimping. So that game is dead. The dope game is dead. It's not cracking like it used to. Back in the 60s and 70s, you had the big time dope dealers on the East Coast. You had the Frank Lucases and the Frank Matthews and the Nicky Barnes and all these people. You had to have connections in order to be in the dope game back in the 70s. You had to have distribution channels. You had to be in with the mafia. You had to know chemists. You had to know a whole bunch of stuff, and you had to have respect on the streets to be in the dope game. The dope game completely changed in 1980, and there were two things that completely changed the dope game. Number one was AIDS. When AIDS came around, a lot of people wanted to shy away from needles because that's what people were using in the 70s. They were using heroin. They were shooting up heroin, and that was the cheap way to get high. The second thing that happened to change the dope game in the 80s was comedian Richard Pryor burning himself up. Do y'all remember that? A lot of people forgot about that, but that incident, that single-handedly changed the game because the thing is, a lot of people were freebasing cocaine, and you had to have money to freebase cocaine. That's why only celebrities can do it. and Richard Pryor was messing with that freebase, and he blew himself up, and he almost died. So the term freebase got thrown into the media. For those who don't know what freebase is when you get cocaine and you mix it with a chemical called ether. Now, the three things about ether is, number one, ether is not that easy to come by. You can't go up to Walmart and say, hey, can I have a bucket of ether and a chapstick? You got to know somebody. Also, ether is very expensive. And number three, ether is very flammable. So a lot of people were dying using ether. So a lot of the chemists in LA, in the California area, they wanted to come up with another way to freebase the cocaine without making it so dangerous. So they finally came up with a substitute for the ether. Let me see, who knows what the substitute was? Oh, we got some drug dealers in the house.